The ballroom was a sea of sharks, and Elara Vance was bleeding. They saw her simple dress, her quiet demeanor, and they laughed. They called her the professor's mousy wife, a drab sparrow among peacocks. Led by the cruel Serafina, the city's elite decided she was nothing. They relished in her humiliation at the grand gala, unaware they were mocking the wealthiest woman in the room. They thought they knew her. They were about to learn how devastatingly wrong they were, one 8-figure donation at a time. The city slid past the window of the town car, a river of diamonds and topaz against the black velvet of the November night. Arthur Vance glanced at his wife, his hand finding hers on the worn leather seat. "Are you sure you're all right, Elara?" He murmured, his voice a familiar, warm comfort. Elara Vance turned from the window. Her reflection was a pale ghost against the glittering skyline of New York City. She was, as always, a study in understatement, while the other women descending on the Grand Astoria ballroom would be encased in the latest confections from Chanel or Dior. Elara wore a vintage Givenchy. It was a simple floor-length sheath of slate-grey silk, a color that perfectly matched her eyes. Her only jewelry was her thin platinum wedding band and a pair of simple pearl earrings. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple, elegant chignon, a style that highlighted the delicate, intelligent bones of her face. "I'm fine, Arthur," she said, her voice as quiet as her dress. "It's just, loud. Even from in here." "It's the Vanguard Gala." Arthur sighed, straightening his own respectable, if not show-stopping tuxedo. "It's the annual peacock mating ritual. We'll make our donation to the Global Children's Relief Fund. You'll admire the architecture, I'll avoid the philosophy department head, and we'll be home by 11. A perfect evening." Elara smiled, a small, genuine curving of her lips that Arthur cherished. "A perfect evening," she agreed. The car stopped. The illusion of peace shattered. A doorman, dripping in gold braid, pulled the door open, and the noise hit them. A wall of sound, composed of camera clicks, shouted names, and the high-pitched, brittle laughter of the city's elite. Arthur stepped out first, a solid, reassuring presence. He turned and offered Elara his hand. As she stepped onto the red carpet, a sudden, blinding series of flashes erupted. Elara flinched, her hand tightening on Arthur's. "It's all right," he soothed. "They're not for us." He was right. The paparazzi were screaming a name, but it wasn't Vance. "Serafina over here." "Serafina. Who are you wearing?" A blood-red Lamborghini had pulled up behind them, and from it emerged Serafina Dubois Huxley. She was not a woman. She was an event. Her dress was a chaotic masterpiece of red feathers and sequins by Balenciaga, and a necklace of truly obscene diamonds on loan from Harry Winston, as the society pages would dutifully report tomorrow, was draped around her throat. Her laughter was loud and abrasive as she kissed the air on either side of an entertainment reporter's head. "She's vibrant," Arthur noted, steering Elara toward the entrance. "She's a distraction," Elara murmured, her eyes already scanning the crowd, cataloguing, observing. They slipped inside past the phalanx of photographers, their arrival as unnoticed as a single falling snowflake in a blizzard. The Grand Astoria ballroom was a cavern of gilded excess. Ceilings vaulted 3 stories high, painted with cherubs and clouds. Chandeliers the size of carriages dripped crystal light over a sea of people who collectively controlled a significant portion of the world's wealth, and they were all looking at each other. "Professor Vance, Arthur, glad you could make it." A man with a booming voice. Marcus Thorne, a real estate developer with a predatory grin, clapped Arthur on the back. His eyes slid over Elara, dismissed her, and returned to Arthur. "Good of you to support the cause." "We wouldn't miss it, Marcus," Arthur said smoothly, his hand resting on the small of Elara's back. "You know my wife, Elara." "Ah, yes." Marcus Thorne gave her a cursory nod, his gaze already scanning the room for a more important target. "Mrs. Vance. Lovely. Now, if you'll excuse me, I see a Rockefeller." He was gone, swallowed by the crowd. "Charming," Elara said, her voice dry. "He's a Philistine," Arthur said, leading her toward the champagne table. "But a necessary one, I'm told." They hadn't taken 5 steps before they were intercepted. Seraphina Dubois Huxley had finally made her entrance, and she moved through the crowd. Not like a person, but like a force of nature, a hurricane of feathers and entitlement, with her 2 loyal sycophants, Beatrice Bea Croft and the same Marcus Thorne, trailing in her wake. Seraphina's eyes, sharp and calculating, landed on Arthur. "Arthur, darling," she boomed, holding out a hand glittering with rings. "How wonderful to see you. I so adored your last paper on pre-Columbian monetary systems. Utterly fascinating." "Seraphina," Arthur said, his smile tight as he dutifully brushed his lips over her knuckles. "You're too kind." "I am never too kind. Darling, I am always just right," she purred. And then her gaze fell on Elara. It was not a kind gaze. It was the look a biologist gives a new, uninteresting specimen under a microscope. Her eyes traveled from Elara's simple hair down to the hem of her slate-grey dress. A slow, condescending smile spread across her perfectly painted red lips. "And you brought her?" Seraphina said, not to Elara, but to Arthur. The her hung in the air, heavy and dismissive. Elara stood perfectly still. She didn't shrink. She didn't blush. She simply watched. "This is my wife, Elara Vance," Arthur said, his voice losing its warmth, turning to steel. "Oh, I know." Seraphina laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "The quiet one. Arthur, really, we must find you a new tailor. And as for your wife, darling," she finally addressed Elara, her voice dropping into a tone of false syrupy concern. "Did you lose a bet that dress? It's so functional. I suppose someone has to be the drab little sparrow in a room full of peacocks. It's so brave of you." "Isn't it brave, Bea?" Bea Croft, a woman who had surgically altered herself to look perpetually surprised, tittered on command. "So brave, Seraphina, utterly courageous." Elara merely tilted her head. "Good evening, Ms. Dubois Huxley. It's a lovely party. The floral arrangements are particularly stunning." The non-reaction, the simple polite observation, seemed to infuriate Seraphina more than any witty retort could have. Seraphina was used to people cowering or fighting back. She didn't know what to do with quiet indifference. "Yes, well," Seraphina snapped, her smile faltering. "Enjoy the canapes. I'm sure they're more to your speed." She turned on her feathered heel and swept away her clique, following dutifully. Arthur let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "I am so sorry, my love. That woman is vile." Elara watched Seraphina's red-feathered retreat. "She's not vile, Arthur," she said, softly, taking a flute of champagne from a passing waiter. "She's just terrified." "Terrified?" Arthur was baffled. "Of what? She owns half the building." Elara took a small, deliberate sip. Her grey eyes were clear and deep. "She's terrified that one day Everyone will look at her, really look at her, and see the same thing she sees in the mirror every morning." "And what's that?" "Nothing at all," Elara said. "Now I believe you promised me a look at that architecture." As they walked away, a few people who had overheard the exchange snickered. The story was already solidifying. Arthur Vance, the charming middleweight academic, was shackled to a mousy, socially inept wife who dressed in hand-me-downs. The first laugh had been cast. The gala settled into its rhythm, a symphony of performative generosity and barely concealed contempt. Elara and Arthur tried to stick to their plan. They examined the gilded cornices, and Elara, who had a mind that processed numbers and patterns with terrifying speed, mentally calculated the structural load of the central chandelier. Arthur pointed out the historical inaccuracies in the Renaissance-style murals, and she squeezed his arm affectionately. They were a small, quiet island in a churning, tempestuous sea, and the sharks were circling. The humiliation was not a single grand event. It was a death by 1,000 tiny, paper-thin cuts. It started with the servers. Elara, thirsty, tried to flag down a waiter carrying a tray of sparkling water. He looked through her, his eyes fixed on a louder, more demanding guest just behind her. Arthur finally had to put a firm hand on the man's arm. "My wife would like a water." The waiter, flustered, handed it over with a mumbled apology, but the message was clear. Elara in her simple grey dress was invisible. Then came the silent auction. The tables were laden with ostentatious prizes: a week on a private yacht, a bespoke sports car, a dinner with a fading movie star. Elara and Arthur browsed more out of curiosity than genuine interest. They paused by a beautiful signed first-edition set of Jane Austen. Arthur, a true romantic, sighed. "Now that is lovely." "Indeed," Elara said, a rare note of genuine interest in her voice. The bidding sheet showed a starting price of $5,000. The current high bid was $15,000, signed by S. Dubois Huxley. "Well, she has expensive if predictable taste," Arthur murmured. "Perhaps we should place a bid," Elara suggested, picking up the pen. Before her pen could touch the paper, a hand adorned with a 10-carat yellow diamond clamped down on her wrist. It was B. Croft Seraphina's chief lieutenant. "Oh, darling, no." B gushed, her voice dripping with fake pity. "You don't want to get into a bidding war with Seraphina. She always gets what she wants. And besides—" her eyes flickered over Elara's dress. "Are you sure you can afford it? I hear a professor's salary doesn't quite stretch to this level of literature." Elara's eyes went cold. She didn't pull her hand away. She simply looked at B's hand on her wrist until the other woman felt the chill and awkwardly pulled it back. "Thank you for the advice, Miss Croft," Elara said, her voice perfectly level. She placed the pen back on the table, her desire for the books instantly extinguished. "It's always wise to know one's limits." "See smart, girl," B said, patting Elara's shoulder as if she were a child. "Now run along. Go get another water." Arthur, who had been momentarily distracted by a colleague, returned to see the tail end of the exchange. He saw the look on B's face and the rigid set of Elara's shoulders. "Is there a problem here?" Arthur's voice was dangerously quiet. "Oh, goodness no, Professor," B tittered. "We were just having a bit of girl talk, weren't we, Elara?" Elara just looked at her. "Come, Arthur," Elara said, taking his arm. "They're about to serve dinner. I'd like to find our table." But the worst was yet to come. As they navigated the crowded floor toward the dining area, Seraphina herself orchestrated the main event. She was holding court near the grand staircase, a flute of champagne in one hand, gesturing wildly as she told a story. Elara, trying to find the path of least resistance, attempted to slip by behind her. It was perhaps an accident, a loss of balance from the queen bee. Serafina stumbled backward, her arm swinging wide. Her full flute of champagne, pink sticky champagne, arced through the air and splashed directly down the front of Elara's slate-grey dress. A collective theatrical gasp went up from the circle around Serafina. The music seemed to dip. The chatter died. Elara stood frozen, the cold liquid soaking through the delicate silk, a large dark stain spreading across her chest. "Oh my God!" Serafina shrieked, her hands flying to her mouth in a perfect pantomime of shock. "Oh, you poor, poor thing! I am so clumsy!" She burst into that high, brittle laugh. "But then again," she said, her voice dropping to a stage whisper that carried across the entire room, "who could even tell? It's just grey. Perhaps I've done it an improvement. Added a little colour to your world, darling." Marcus Thorne and B. Croft howled with laughter. Others farther away just stared, caught between embarrassment and the cruel theatre of it all. Elara didn't say a word. She looked down at the stain, then up at Serafina's triumphant, smiling there. Arthur, his face a mask of thunder, was already shrugging out of his tuxedo jacket to cover her. "That's enough, Serafina." Arthur's voice was a low growl. "Enough, darling, it was an accident." Serafina scoffed. "Though really," she added, leaning in conspiratorially, "you should thank me. That dress was a tragedy. Now it's a statement." Elara put a hand on Arthur's chest, stopping him. She looked directly at Serafina. The ballroom held its breath, waiting for the mousy wife to cry, to scream, to run. Elara did none of those things. She simply reached up, took the sodden napkin offered by a panicked waiter, and began to dab very precisely at the stain. "It's quite all right, Miss Dubois Huxley," Elara said, her voice clear in the sudden silence. "It's just a dress. And you're right. Accidents happen." She turned to her husband. "Please put your jacket back on, Arthur. You'll be cold. A little champagne won't hurt me." This was the ultimate insult. Elara's total, unassailable composure. She had taken Serafina's most potent venom and neutralized it with simple, quiet grace. Serafina's smile became a sneer. She had wanted tears, and Elara had given her poise. "Well, if you're going to be such a bore about it." Serafina spat. She snapped her fingers. "Waiter. Another bottle of the Dom. This one is empty." She tossed her empty flute onto the man's tray with a clatter. As she swept away, the crowd parted for her, but the whispers that followed were different. They weren't just about Elara's drab dress. They were about Serafina's brutal attack. Elara, by doing nothing, had suddenly subtly shifted the room's dynamic. She had become a victim, and Serafina a bully. Arthur wrapped his jacket around Elara's shoulders anyway, ignoring her protest. "That," he whispered, his lips near her ear, "is the last time. We're leaving." "No," Elara said, her voice surprisingly firm. The champagne had been cold, and it had acted like a splash of water to her face. The observation phase was over. "No, Arthur, we are not leaving. We are going to sit down at our table. We are going to eat our overcooked salmon. And we are going to make our donation." She looked up at him, and her grey eyes, usually so calm now, had a spark in them. A tiny burning ember. "I believe," she said, "it's time to show them what functional really looks like." They found their table. It was as they'd expected, in the Siberia of the ballroom near the kitchens, with a lovely view of a service corridor. They were seated with a junior city councilman, a retired opera singer, who had brought her cat in a jeweled carrier, and two distant cousins of the event's founder, who were arguing about an inheritance. Elara, now draped in Arthur's oversized tuxedo jacket, seemed perfectly content. She ate her salmon, complimented the cat, and listened politely as the councilman explained his plan for zoning reform. "She's handling this better than I am," Arthur muttered to himself, pushing his food around his plate. He was furious. He was a man of books and ideas, and this world of performative cruelty, this waste, it grated on his soul. But Elara, she was processing. From the main stage, the auctioneer, a man with a slick tuxedo and a voice that could charm a snake, kicked off the main event. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, "we've had the silent auction, but now it's time for the real generosity to begin. Remember what we're here for. The children, the Global Children's Relief Fund." A slickly produced video played on the massive screens, showing smiling children in clinics and schools built by the fund. It was emotional, effective, and designed to open wallets. Elara watched, her face unreadable. Then the bidding began. "First up," the auctioneer shouted, "a private 1-week stay at a villa in Tuscany, private chef included. Do I hear $50,000? A dozen hands flew up. Serafina Dubois Huxley bids $75,000, the auctioneer pointed. Marcus Thorne counters at $80,000. Serafina comes back at $100,000. Serafina was on her feet, a new glass of champagne in hand, blowing kisses. She won the villa for $120,000 to thunderous applause. Next up, a walk-on role in a new Marvel movie. Then a custom-designed experience with a celebrity chef. Serafina or one of her clique bid loudly and ostentatiously on every single item. They weren't just donating. They were conquering. They were buying their status in the room, one extravagant purchase at a time. Elara watched a small black notebook, one she always carried, appearing in her hand. She uncapped a simple black pen and began to write. Arthur, curious, leaned over. "What are you doing?" "Writing a review of the salmon." "I'm doing math," Elara whispered back, not looking up. "The villa has a market value of generously $40,000. She paid $120,000. That's an $80K charitable write-off. The walk-on role, valueless, but the cachet of bragging about it. She values that at $50,000. She's not buying items, Arthur. She's buying social capital, and she's getting it at a 3-to-1 premium." Arthur blinked. "You see all that?" "I see the numbers," Elara said. "The numbers never lie." The master of ceremonies, a genial TV host named David Chen, finally retook the stage. "What an incredible auction. Thank you, Serafina Marcus Bear, for your stunning generosity. Tonight, from the auction alone, we have raised $2,500. The room erupted. Serafina stood and took a bow, as if she alone had written the check. "A truly amazing number." David continued his smile, never wavering. "But folks, our goal for the new pediatric wing is $5 million. We are only halfway there." The mood sobered slightly. "And now," David said, "we come to the part of the evening, the pledge drive, where we ask you to open your hearts. We're going to put the thermometer on the screen. Our associates are in the aisles. You can pledge by cash, by card, or by raising your paddle. Let's see if we can close this gap. Let's see if we can get to $5 million for the children." A massive screen behind him lit up, showing the current total, $2,500,000. The music swelled. The lights dimmed. Waiters moved through the tables, offering more wine, their other hand holding a tablet for donations. "Who will start us off?" David pleaded. "I will," Serafina shouted, her voice slurring slightly. She stood up again, weaving. "Put me down for another $250,000. The room exploded again. Serafina blew another kiss. The number on the screen jumped $2,750,000. "Thank you, Serafina. A queen of generosity," David cried. This triggered a small avalanche. 10,000, 25,000, the number crept up. 3 million, 3.2 million, 3.5 million, and then it stalled. The room grew quiet. The initial flurry of easy donations was over. They were still $1.5 million short. David Chen's smile was becoming strained. "Come on, ladies and gentlemen," he urged. "I know we can do this. Who has been saving their generosity for this very moment? Don't be shy." The room was silent. The sound of clinking silverware was suddenly deafening. Serafina, seeing her moment, grabbed the microphone from a nearby coordinator's table. "David, darling, it's just awful," she said into the mic, her voice echoing through the ballroom. The feedback screeched. "Serafina, please," David began, but she waved him off. "It's just tacky." Serafina continued, her eyes scanning the room, and then, as if drawn by a magnet, landing on table 42 in the back by the kitchens. "It's just so tacky," she repeated, "that some people come to these events, eat the food, drink the champagne, and just take up space. They just sit there like little grey mice." Here she stared directly at Alara, while the rest of us who care, are shouldering the burden. It's pathetic." The room was mortified. Arthur was halfway out of his chair, his face white with rage. "Alara, that's it. We're leaving now." But Alara didn't move. She was looking at the screen, not at Serafina, not at the people staring, at the numbers. 3,000. Goal, $5,000. She was still on her phone. Serafina had seen it earlier and mocked her. So rude, can't even pay attention. But Alara was paying attention. She took a sip of her water. She closed her small black notebook. She picked up her phone. Her fingers, long and elegant, began to type. "Alara," Arthur said, his voice raw. Alara didn't look up from her phone. Her thumb moved over the screen, pressing, swiping, confirming. "It's all right, Arthur," she said, her voice a low, calm vibration. "She's right about one thing." "What?" he asked, exasperated. Alara's thumb pressed the confirm button on her screen. A small transaction successful icon flashed. She finally looked up, her gaze cutting through the dim light of the ballroom, past the jeering face of Serafina to the desperate face of the MC on the stage. "It is pathetic," she said. "They're not thinking nearly big enough. To understand what Alara Vance did next, you have to understand who she was. And no one in that ballroom, save Arthur, and even he only knew 90% of it, had any idea. Alara Vance was not Alara Vance. She was born Elara Vick, the daughter of a high school math teacher and a librarian in Omaha, Nebraska. She was a quiet child, a numbers girl. While other kids were playing house, Elara was learning Fortran. While they were at prom, she was winning national mathematics Olympiads. She went to Caltech on a full scholarship at 16. She was awkward. She didn't understand social cues. She understood binary. She saw the world not as a series of social interactions, but as a series of interconnected systems of inputs and outputs. And she saw very early on that the world systems were inefficient. In her dorm room at 19, she solved a problem that the brightest minds at Google, Amazon, and Microsoft were spending billions on predictive data compression. She wrote an algorithm. It was so elegant, so revolutionary, it could compress and stream massive data packets. Think entire genomes or high-definition video with almost zero latency. She called it Ether. She didn't want to be a CEO. She didn't want to be famous. She hated meetings. She just wanted to build the next thing. So she did something smart. She licensed the core of Ether, not the platform itself, anonymously through a shell corporation she'd set up, with the help of a single, very discreet lawyer. The first check from a major defense contractor was for $50 million. She was 20 years old. She used that money to build the full Ether platform, a cloud computing logic core that was light years ahead of its competitors. By the time she was 22, every major tech company in the world was either using Ether's licensed tech or trying to buy the platform outright. When the Silicon Valley giants came knocking, they didn't find a young woman in a hoodie. They found a series of firewalled servers and a holding company registered in Delaware, Vance Aurelia Holdings. The Vance was for her grandmother. The Aurelia was for Marcus Aurelius, her favorite philosopher. When the bidding war for the majority stake of Ether concluded, Elara, now 23, was one of the wealthiest people on the planet. The final sale was for $22 billion. She had sold 90% of the company, but on one condition: she retained a 10% stake, a permanent and anonymous seat on the board, and final say over the Ether Foundation, the massive philanthropic arm she'd built into the company's bylaws. The world knew the name Ether. It was the invisible backbone of their smart homes, their streaming services, their stock markets. But the creator, the ghost in the machine, was unknown. The press called the anonymous founder EV and speculated it was a man. Elara, now with more money than God, did something truly radical. She vanished. She finished her degree. She moved to New York. And she went to the one place she had always felt safe, the library. She was working part-time for free as a researcher at the New York Public Library, just because she liked the quiet of the archives when she met Arthur Vance. He was a young, brilliant, and utterly broke history professor, researching a paper on the 12th century spice trade routes. He thought she was just another librarian. He was captivated by her mind, by the way she saw patterns he'd missed. He fell in love with the quiet girl who read Marcus Aurelius in the original Latin. When she finally told him 6 months into their relationship, he didn't believe her. Not until she took him to a small, unassuming brownstone in the village which she owned, and then showed him the other brownstone next door, which she also owned. She'd had the basements connected to, house her private server bank, and a full-scale analysis lab. So, he had said, sitting on her roof, looking at the stars, the $22 billion figure echoing in his head. The money. What do you do with it? Mostly I give it away, she'd said simply. But it's difficult. People behave strangely when they know. They stop being real. They want things. I don't like being wanted. I just like being. So you're Evie, he'd asked. I'm Elara, she'd said, and I would very much like it if you would just call me Elara. So he did. They got married at City Hall. They bought a comfortable but not ostentatious apartment on the Upper West Side. Arthur kept his job at the university. Elara kept her job as the anonymous head of Vance Aurelia Holdings, managing a philanthropic and investment portfolio that dwarfed the GDP of small countries. The Ether Foundation became her primary tool. It was a silent giant. It didn't put its name on buildings. It funded the research. It endowed scholarships, paid for clean water infrastructure in 50 countries, and anonymously covered the debts of failing hospitals. Elara Vance lived her life by a simple code: observe, calculate, and act. And sitting at table 42 in her champagne-soaked dress, being mocked by a woman who valued a pair of shoes at 10,000. Elara had finished her calculations. Serafina's total contribution across all her performative bids was $370,000. It was a lot of money. But Elara on her phone had just checked the public records of the Dubois-Huxley Foundation. It had assets of $500 million. Serafina's donation represented less than 1/10 of 1% of her foundation's holdings. It was by Elara's math, a rounding error. A pathetic, insulting rounding error given the need. Elara looked at the video of the children. She looked at the total stalled at $3.5 million. She looked at her husband's angry, protective face. She made her decision. Elara, I mean it. Let's go. Arthur was standing, his hand out. The humiliation had become a physical weight, and he couldn't bear to see his wife, the most brilliant person he knew, subjected to it for one more second. Sit down, Arthur, Elara said. Her voice wasn't a request. It was a quiet, calm command that cut through his anger. He stared at her, confused, and slowly sat. What are you doing? He whispered. I'm solving a problem, Elara said, her eyes on the stage. They have an insufficient funds issue. I have a liquidity surplus. It's a simple match. On her phone, she had just completed the transaction. A simple encrypted wire transfer from the Vance Aurelia Holdings primary philanthropic account to the Global Children's Relief Fund. The transfer was, by her standards, a modest one. She stood up. The entire table stared at her. Even the opera singer's cat looked up. Arthur's tuxedo jacket fell from her shoulders, pooling at her waist. She left it on the chair. She stood revealed in the slate-grey Givenchy dress, the dark, ugly stain of the pink champagne stark against the silk. She didn't try to hide it. She wore it like a battle scar. Elara, where are you going? Arthur asked, a note of panic in his voice. To talk to the event manager, she said, and she began to walk. The ballroom was still trapped in that awful posturing silence left by Serafina's speech. The MC David Chen was on stage, his face fixed in a rictus of a smile, desperately trying to think of a way to salvage the evening. Come on, people, he was saying weakly. I know we can. He trailed off, watching as Elara Vance walked out of the shadows of Siberia. She didn't walk down the main aisle. She walked along the perimeter by the service stations, moving with a quiet, unhurried purpose. People turned to look. First it was the waiters, then the tables nearest the edge. A new whisper began. Who is that? It's the professor's wife. The one Serafina spilled on. Look at her dress. How embarrassing. Serafina saw her. She was back at her front and center table, preening. She nudged Bay. "Oh, look!" Serafina hissed loud enough for her table to hear. "The mouse is running, probably going to the bathroom to cry. So pathetic." But Alara wasn't going to the bathroom. She was heading for the side stage area, where a harassed-looking man in a headset, the event coordinator, was frantically talking to the lighting booth. Alara walked up to him. She waited patiently for him to finish yelling into his microphone. "And I don't care if the generator is—" He sensed someone standing next to him and turned, annoyed. "What, can't you see I'm—" He stopped. He looked at Alara. He saw the stained dress, the quiet face. He saw in his mind a 2,500 a plate guest who was probably lost or about to complain about the salmon. "Ma'am, the restrooms are to the left. If you have a complaint—" "I don't have a complaint," Alara said, her voice barely audible over the din. "I need to speak to Mr. Chen, the MC." The coordinator laughed, a short, sharp bark of stress. "Ma'am, he's in the middle of a show. We are $1.5 million short. I do not have time for—" "I know," Alara said. "That's why I need to speak to him. Or you can." "Speak to me about what?" he snapped. Alara held up her phone. On the screen was a bank confirmation, a wire transfer receipt from Vance Aurelia Holdings to the Global Children's Relief Fund. The coordinator squinted at it. He didn't understand. "Vance Aurelia. What is this?" "That is a donation," Alara said simply. "Great, fine," the coordinator said, waving his hand dismissively. "We'll add it to the—" "Wait." He looked again. His eyes scanned past the routing numbers, past the encryption codes, and landed on the amount. His face went white. The color drained from his skin, leaving a pasty, sickly pallor. His hand, the one holding the clipboard, began to shake. Is this a joke?" he stammered. "I don't joke about money," Alara said. "This is—" He couldn't say the number. He just pointed at the screen, his finger trembling. "Yes," Alara said, "but I have a request. I would like the donation to be anonymous, from a friend, but I would like the amount to be reflected on the thermometer." "Can you do that?" The coordinator, whose name was Mark, just stared at her. He looked from the phone to her face. He saw the stained dress. He saw the simple pearl earrings. He saw the professor's mousy wife. And he saw the number on the phone. Phone screen. His brain simply broke. "Ma'am," he whispered, his voice cracking. That's more than—" "Can you do it or not?" Alara asked, not unkindly. "I understand if your system can't process a donation of that size from the floor. I can wait until tomorrow." "No." Mark yelped suddenly, terrified. This impossible magical number would vanish. "No, I can... Yes, I can do it." He fumbled for his headset, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped it. "David," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "David, get ready. Get ready. I'm patching in a new pledge. A big one." On stage, David Chen heard the crackle in his ear. "A big one? How big, Mark?" "Did we get another 50K? Mark looked at Alara, who was just watching him with those calm, grey eyes. "No, David," Mark whispered into the mic, his gaze locked on the quiet woman in the stained dress. "You're not going to believe me." David Chen was dying on stage. The air was thick with the smell of expensive perfume and the sound of failure. They were stalled at $3,500,000. It was a disaster. "Come on, New York," he pleaded, his TV host's smile frozen in place. One last push for the children. Silence. Then his earpiece crackled. It was Mark, his event coordinator, and he sounded like he was having a seizure. David, get ready. I'm patching in a new pledge. A big one. A big one. How big, Mark? David said, his voice hopeful. Did we get another 50K? There was a long, static-filled pause. Then Mark's voice came back, shaky and thin. No, David. You're not going to believe me. Just put it on the board, Mark. David snapped, his patience gone. Okay. Patching it to the main board, now. Behind David, the massive screen with the thermometer flickered. The total $3,500 blinked, and then it vanished. The number was replaced by a new donation entry, a new single-line item at the bottom of the pledge list. It read, Pledge, $30,000, $1,000, Donor Anonymous. Friend. For a full 3 seconds, the room did not react. The collective consciousness of the 800 people in the ballroom simply could not process the number. Their brains, attuned to $50,000 and $100,000, saw too many zeros. They thought it was a typo. Serafina at her table squinted. 30,000. Is that all? How cheap. No, Serafina. Marcus Thorne whispered, his face pale. Read it again. That's $30 million. The silence broke. It was not a gasp. It was a roar, a sound like a physical shock wave. 1,000 what? And, oh my God, all at once. The new total flashed on the screen. New total. $30,500,000. David Chen. The MC stared at the number. He turned to Mark in the wings, his face a mask of utter bewilderment. Mark, still shaking, pointed. He wasn't trying to point. It was an involuntary gesture. He was just pointing at Alara, who was standing right next to him. David followed the line of Mark's trembling finger. It led him to the professor's wife, the mousy woman in the stained grey dress. The spotlight operator, confused and panicked, thought David was trying to point out the donor. He swiveled his light, and a hard, bright, white circle of light left David Chen and slammed onto Alara Vance, bathing her in an isolating, brutal glare. The entire 800-person ballroom went dead silent. Alara froze. This was not part of the plan. She hadn't calculated for this. She squinted into the light, her hand flying up to shield her eyes. And in that instant, everyone saw her. They saw the plain, dark hair. They saw the simple pearl earrings. And they saw, in horrifying high definition, the massive dark stain of champagne splashed across her chest. The whispers started again, but this time they weren't dismissive. They were sharp, confused, and electric. That's not possible. It's the professor's wife, 30 million. Her husband's a teacher. It's a mistake. It has to be a mistake. At the front table, Serafina Dubois Huxley was on her feet. Her face, a mask of perfectly applied makeup, was contorted in a mask of pure, unfiltered rage and disbelief. "That's absurd!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Stop the show, it's a joke. She's no one. She's nothing." She was screaming at David, at the technicians, at the universe. "She's probably just taking credit." Serafina pointed a finger, her diamonds flashing. "She's a fraud. She's a pathetic little liar." The room was on a knife's edge. They wanted to believe Serafina. It made sense that Elara was a fraud. It made more sense than the idea that this quiet, unassuming woman in a ruined dress had just casually dropped $30 million. Elara, trapped in the spotlight, looked lost. She looked at Arthur, who was frozen at his table, his face a picture of stunned, terrified pride. She looked at Serafina, who was marching toward the stage, her red feathers practically vibrating with fury. "I demand to see the manager. This is an insult to the real donors." The entire gala was about to collapse into a brawl. And then a new voice cut through the chaos. "I can assure you, Ms. Dubois-Huxley, the donation is quite real." The voice was deep calm and carried the weight of absolute authority. The crowd parted. Striding from the VIP section, the tables reserved for the real money, the old guard, was Robert Chen. Robert Chen was not just the MC's uncle. He was the CEO of the bank that sponsored the gala. He was a man who didn't just attend galas. He approved them. His bank, the Bank of Metropolitan Trust, handled the accounts for half the people in this room. And as it happened, it was the primary domestic bank for the Global Children's Relief Fund. He walked past Serafina as if she were a piece of furniture and stopped at the edge of the stage looking at Elara, who was still blinking in the spotlight. He gave a short, formal bow. "Mrs. Vance," he said, and his voice was picked up by the still live microphone on the podium. The entire room heard him. "I must apologize. I was not aware you were in attendance this evening. Had I known E.V. herself was gracing us, I would have seated you at my table." A new, more profound silence fell. "E.V. Who is E.V.?" Serafina stopped. What did you call her?" Robert Chen turned to Serafina. His eyes were cold. "I called her Ms. Dubois-Huxley by the name we at the bank use for our most valued clients. The principal of Vance Aurelia Holdings." The name Vance Aurelia rippled through the financial types in the room. It was a ghost, a behemoth, a holding company that moved markets without ever making a sound. But, Vance," Serafina stammered. "Her name is Vance." Robert Chen nodded. "Indeed, a coincidence, I'm sure." He turned back to Elara. "Mrs. Vance, your friend's donation has just been confirmed by our wire transfer division. It is to date the single largest private donation in the history of this fund. We are speechless." The spotlight on Elara was no longer an accusation. It was an anointment. She just nodded once to Mr. Chen. "It's for the children," she said, her voice a quiet whisper that miraculously the microphone seemed to catch. They deserve it." "No." Serafina's voice was a desperate wail. "I don't believe you. She's a fake." Arthur was at Elara's side now. He had crossed the ballroom floor in 10 long strides, and he put his arm around his wife's waist, pulling her out of the spotlight. "That's enough," he said to Robert Chen. "We're leaving." "Of course," Mr. Chen said, dipping his head again. But David Chen, the MC, who had been standing on stage with his jaw on the floor, suddenly got his voice back. The producer in his ear was screaming. "Wait! Wait!" David shouted, his voice high with adrenaline. "Mr. Chen! Mrs. Vance! We have another announcement." He was holding a new card just handed to him by the frantic coordinator, Mark. "Ladies and gentlemen," David said, his voice shaking with a new wild excitement. The $30 million donation. It has He looked at the card, unable to believe the words. It has triggered a pre-arranged legacy match from... He paused. He looked right at Robert Chen, then at Elara. From the Ether Foundation. The name Ether hit the room like a bomb. Ether wasn't just money. Ether was everything. It was the invisible tech that ran their phones, their cars, their banks. The Ether Foundation, David read, his voice trembling, has a standing legacy match for the Global Children's Relief Fund. Any single donation over $25 million is matched, 5-to-1. He stopped. He did the math in his head. The room did the math with him. 5-to-1. 5 times 30 million. That's, David whispered, that's an additional $150 million. The sound that left the room was not a cheer. It was a single primal scream of disbelief. The thermometer on the screen exploded. The numbers spun like a slot machine, hitting the jackpot. $50, $1,000, $1,000, $100,000, $1,000, $1,000, $150,000, £1,000. It settled on a final impossible number. Grand total $183,500,000. In a matter of 90 seconds, Elara Vance had not just met the $5 million goal. She had funded the entire pediatric wing, endowed it for a century, and probably paid for the next 3 hospitals after that. The donation wasn't just more than every guest combined. It was more than the last decade of galas combined. Elara Vance looked at the number. She looked at the pandemonium. She looked at the flashing cameras, which were no longer on Serafina, but were burning into her. She turned to Arthur, her face pale, and whispered, "I think I overdid it." "No," Arthur said, a slow, wide grin spreading across his face. He kissed her right there in front of the entire, screaming, baffled room. "I think you were just right." He wrapped his arm around her, and they turned to leave. The entire ballroom, all 800 people, parted for them like the Red Sea. The billionaires, the rock stars, the politicians. They stared. They moved out of the way. No one spoke. No one breathed. They walked past table 1, where Serafina Dubois Huxley stood frozen. Her face was a ruin. The champagne flute she had been holding slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. She didn't notice. She just watched the quiet woman in the stained grey dress. The woman who had just ended her reign, her world, her everything, with a quiet tap on a phone, walk out of the ballroom, leaving an echo of $180 million in her wake. The ride home was silent. The city lights were the same, but they felt different. Elara leaned her head against Arthur's shoulder, the adrenaline finally draining away, leaving her exhausted. "Ether," Arthur said softly, breaking the silence as the car idled at a red light. "You triggered the Ether match. You are Evie." Elara sighed. "Vance Aurelia is my personal fund. Ether is the corporate one. It was the most efficient way to maximize the capital. The match was already in place. I just activated it." "You activated it," Arthur repeated, and he started to laugh. It was a low, warm, bubbling laugh. "My God, Elara, you activated $150 million. It's not funny, Arthur. My anonymity is compromised." "My love," he said, turning to look at her, "your anonymity was a fortress. Tonight you just lowered the drawbridge, and you did it to stop a bully from hurting my feelings." "It wasn't," Elara started. "It wasn't just that. It was the children in the video, and—" she touched the still damp stain on her dress. "And it was the math. Serafina's donation was inefficient. It was an insult to the problem." The car pulled up to their brownstone. There were no paparazzi. Not yet. They were all still at the hotel trying to get a quote from a comatose Serafina. They went inside. Elara kicked off her simple heels. Arthur hung up his tux. Elara peeled off the ruined Givenchy dress and dropped it in the trash. She reappeared in an old, soft grey t-shirt, Arthur's, and a pair of flannel pants. She went into the kitchen and started to make tea. The next morning the world was on fire. The story was everywhere, not just on page 6. It was the front page above the fold headline in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. The ghost of ether mystery, donor EV, unmasked at Vanguard Gala. The $180 million mouse. Serafina's folly. How New York's queen was dethroned by a quiet professor's wife. The articles were brutal. They had photos. A picture of Serafina, her face contorted in a sneer. A picture of Elara trapped in the spotlight, her dress stained. A picture of the final impossible number on the board. Serafina Dubois Huxley was in a word finished. The Queen was a joke. Her clique had evaporated. Marcus Thorne was already giving off-the-record quotes about how he always found her a bit crass. B. Croft was rumoured to be on a plane to Switzerland. The Dubois Huxley Foundation was under review by the IRS, triggered by an anonymous tip about her creative accounting. Arthur sat at their kitchen table, a simple oak table, reading the paper on his tablet. Elara was at the stove making pancakes. "It says here," Arthur said, "that Elara Vance, the reclusive EV of Ether, is poised to become the new quiet face of global philanthropy." "I don't want to be a face," Elara said, flipping a pancake. "I want to be a pair of hands." There was a knock at their door. Not a loud, demanding knock. A quiet, polite one. Arthur opened it. It was Robert Chen, the bank CEO, and a woman Arthur didn't recognize. "Professor Vance," Robert said, his voice hushed. "I apologize for the intrusion. This is Dr. Aris, the CEO of the Global Children's Relief Fund. We came to say thank you." Elara came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She was wearing her flannel pants and Arthur's t-shirt. Dr. Aris, a woman who had seen war zones and famines, looked at Elara, and her eyes filled with tears. "Mrs. Vance." "Elara, what you did, you haven't just funded a wing. You have funded the end of 3 separate tropical diseases. You have saved, quite literally, millions of lives." Elara looked uncomfortable. "It was the logical thing to do." Dr. Aris continued, "we want to name the new wing after you. The Elara Vance Center for—" "No." Elara said so quickly it was almost sharp. "Absolutely not." "But, no, I have one condition for the ether match." Robert Chen and Dr. Aris held their breath. "The new wing," Elara said, "and all the research it produces. You will name it after someone who actually deserves it. Someone who was a real architect of change." She paused. "You will call it the Dr. Madeleine Albright Center for Global Child Welfare." Robert Chen and Dr. Aris just stared at her. They had expected ego demands. They got homework. "That is," Dr. Aris said, A brilliant and fitting tribute. Of course. Good, Elara said. Now if you'll excuse me, the pancakes are burning. She nodded, turned and went back to the kitchen. Robert Chen looked at Arthur, his mind still reeling. She is, Arthur said, a proud, happy smile on his face. The quietest and loudest person I have ever met. Good day, gentlemen. He closed the door, leaving them on the stoop. He walked into the kitchen where Elara was plating the pancakes. The smell of maple syrup and butter filled the small, quiet apartment. Doctor, Madeline Albright, Arthur asked, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. She was practical, Elara murmured, leaning back into him. She got things done. I admire that. Arthur kissed the top of her head. I love you, Elara Vance. I love you too, Arthur, she said. Now eat. You have a 9 a.m. lecture on pre-Columbian monetary systems, and you can't be late. And in their small, quiet brownstone, as the city outside screamed her name, the most powerful woman in the world sat down and ate her pancakes. In the end, it wasn't the money that silenced the room. It was the realization that true power doesn't need to scream. Elara Vance didn't just write a check. She rewrote the rules of their entire world, all without raising her voice. Her story is a powerful reminder that the quietest person in the room is often the one holding all the cards. What did you think of Elara's quiet revenge? Have you ever seen someone so underestimated prove everyone wrong? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. We all love a story where the bully gets what they deserve. If you enjoyed this, please like, share, and subscribe for more dramatic stories just like this one. Your support helps us create more content, and it means the world. We'll see you in the next story.